September 1941. It was a cold morning. In the heart of Saxony, a massive castle rose 150 feet above the moldy river. Colditz, Nazi Germany's most secure, most escape-proof prison camp. Hermann Göring himself had said of this castle, "Escape is impossible." That morning, a new group of prisoners was entering through the castle gates. All British officers, all problem prisoners who had previously attempted to escape from other camps. But among them was one man who was very different from the rest. Among all the white faces, there was a single brown face, a single Indian, Dr. Birendranath Mazumdar. If you're curious about this story, subscribe to the channel right now. And this man's story would become one of the least known, most heartbreaking, yet most inspiring stories of World War II. If you think heroism is only shown on battlefields, I strongly recommend you watch this video to the end, because sometimes true courage must be shown not against your enemies, but against your own friends. If you enjoy stories like this and you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We will continue telling the stories of these forgotten heroes. Now let's learn who Mazumdar was and how he ended up in this castle. Birendranath Mazumdar was born in 1914 or 1915 in Gaya, India. He didn't come from an ordinary family. His father was a renowned surgeon. His family was one of the most respected Brahmin families in Bengal, wealthy, educated, aristocratic. Mazumdar was educated in British-style elite schools in India. He learned Victorian British values, duty, loyalty, morality, honesty. In 1931, when he was only 16 or 17 years old, he came to England. He studied medicine. He was admitted to the Royal College of Surgeons in London. He spoke 6 languages: English, German, French, Bengali, and more. His English, flawless, with an aristocratic accent. Anyone who heard him would close their eyes and think they were speaking with an English gentleman. But when eyes were open, that's when everything changed. Mazumdar spoke like an Englishman, behaved like an Englishman, thought like an Englishman, but according to most English people, he didn't look like an Englishman. And in the world of the 1930s and 1940s, this small detail could change everything. Seems a bit strange for today, doesn't it? Here's the interesting part. Mazumdar supported Indian independence. He was an admirer of Mahatma Gandhi. He even sympathized with the ideas of a more radical figure, Subhash Chandra Bose. He wanted British colonial rule to end. So why did he join the British Army when war broke out in 1939? Let's see. Because Mazumdar knew that the Nazi threat was more urgent than anything else. Defeating Hitler had to come before even India's independence. And as a doctor, as a physician, he wanted to help people. So he joined the Royal Army Medical Corps. He swore an oath of loyalty to King George VI. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. This oath would later save his life, but it would also become his greatest test. In February 1940, Mazumdar was sent to France. He was assigned to the 18th British General Hospital in Étaples. His job was simple, caring for wounded soldiers. But war is never simple. May 1940, Germany was invading France. Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Chaos was everywhere. Mazumdar was given a mission to take an ambulance convoy from Étaples to Boulogne to evacuate the wounded. But German forces were everywhere. The convoy was surrounded. Mazumdar and those with him were captured. And so began Dr. Birendranath Mazumdar's years of captivity. The first stop was a prisoner camp in Kassel. From there, Mazumdar would be sent to more than 12 different camps. Why? Because he was Deutschfeindlich, meaning hostile to Germans, a problem prisoner, someone who wouldn't submit to the rules, who resisted at every opportunity. For example, in Kassel, the Germans ordered him to shave his head. Mazumdar refused. He was punished, but he didn't bend. The Germans tried to bring him to their side. They offered him a place in the Indian Legion. Mazumdar refused. He refused again and again. And each time he refused, the Germans sent him to another camp, until September 1941, when he was sent to the most escape-proof camp of all, Colditz. So why was this camp different?
Colditz Castle was no ordinary prisoner camp. Built in the 11th century and expanded over the centuries, it was a massive medieval fortress. It rose in the heart of Saxony atop a cliff, a single entrance gate, thick stone walls, guards everywhere. Among Allied prisoners, it was known as the Naughty Boys Camp, because everyone sent here was an officer who had previously tried to escape from other camps or caused problems for the Germans. British, French, Polish, Dutch, Belgian, they were all here. They were all planning to escape. Tunnels were being dug, fake uniforms were being sewn, secret radios were being built. And among these elite prisoners, Mazumdar arrived in September 1941. The only Indian, the only brown-skinned person, the only different face was his. I need to tell you something here. In popular culture, Colditz is usually portrayed as a place where brave British officers fought against the Germans in unity. The BBC series from the 1970s, Pat Reed's books, they all spread this myth of jolly good chaps. But the reality was much more complicated. Ben Macintyre's 2022 book, Prisoners of the Castle, brought to light the truths behind this myth. There was class division at Colditz, there was racism, there was prejudice, and one of the biggest victims of this prejudice was Dr. Mazumdar. From his very first day at Colditz, Mazumdar was ostracized. The British officers gave him the nickname Jumbo. Why Jumbo? Because during the Victorian era, there was a famous Indian elephant at the London Zoo named Jumbo. Do you understand? They associated him with an animal, an elephant. Mazumdar hated this nickname, but he couldn't escape it. And the nickname was just the beginning. Mazumdar was a doctor, the camp's only Indian doctor. He cared for wounded and sick prisoners. He didn't hesitate to confront German guards, demanding medicine and supplies for sick prisoners. This courage, this dedication should have endeared him to the other prisoners, earned him respect. But the opposite happened. The other British officers looked at him with suspicion. Why? Because he was Indian, because it was known he supported Gandhi, because they learned he was against British colonial rule. They didn't trust him. They saw him as a potential traitor. And you know what the most painful thing was? Mazumdar had volunteered for the British Army. He had sworn an oath to the king. He had said no to the Germans repeatedly, yet he still wasn't trusted. Historian Ben Macintyre summarizes the situation like this. Mazumdar was subjected to terrible racism by British officers, not by the Germans. The Germans saw him as a propaganda opportunity, but his own comrades, his own brothers in arms, treated him like a second-class citizen. They made him cook for them. They made him clean, as if he were a servant. And the worst part? They wouldn't let him escape. Yes, you heard that right. The British Escape Committee at Colditz forbade Mazumdar from being included in any escape plan. The reason? You escape from here with that brown skin of yours? These words were said to Mazumdar's face by a British officer. Think about it. The man was an officer in the British Army. He had sworn an oath to the king. He had fought against the Germans. He had been captured. And now his own side was telling him, you can't escape because of your skin color. This is a terrible situation. This was one of the darkest faces of war. In the heart of Nazi Germany, British officers were practicing racial discrimination among themselves. But Mazumdar didn't give up. Never. Make sure to subscribe while you're at it. And his real test would come in the summer of 1942. One day, German guards summoned him. He was to be taken to Berlin for a special meeting. Who was waiting for him in Berlin?
Subhas Chandra Bose, the most controversial figure of the Indian independence movement, the man who collaborated with the Nazis and founded the Indian Legion. Mazumdar faced a choice, and this choice would reveal his true character. I'll tell you the continuation of this story in the next part. What did Mazumdar experience in Berlin? How did his meeting with Bose go? And what did he face when he returned to Colditz? If you're curious about the rest of this story, don't forget to like the video and leave a comment. Tell me in the comments, what would you do? Would you join someone fighting for your country's independence, or would you stay loyal to the oath you took? Subscribe to the channel now and like the video. Let's continue. Welcome to the second part, everyone. We're continuing without stopping. June 1942. A Mercedes leaves Colditz. There's a single prisoner inside, Dr. Birendranath Mazumdar. Destination: Berlin, the heart of Nazi Germany. Who was waiting for Mazumdar? Subhas Chandra Bose, India's most controversial independence fighter, one of the British Empire's most wanted men. And at that moment, he was a guest of the Nazis. Do you know what the reaction of the British officers was when this news spread at Colditz? We already knew it. That man is a traitor, a spy. There he goes, finally showing his true face. Many thought they would never see Mazumdar again. We didn't expect to see him again, a prisoner said later. But the truth was very different. Now, stop and imagine this moment. Mazumdar is riding in the back seat of a Mercedes toward Berlin. He's watching Nazi Germany through the window. Swastikas on the streets, uniformed soldiers everywhere, propaganda posters. This was one of the most dangerous places in the world, and he, a brown-skinned Indian, was being taken into the middle of this city. What must have been going through his mind? Perhaps he was thinking, what will Bose offer, and what will I answer? Because Mazumdar had complicated feelings about Bose. Bose was a man ready to do anything for India's independence. He found Gandhi's method of passive resistance inadequate. He believed in armed struggle, and for this cause, he didn't hesitate to collaborate with the Nazis and the Japanese. Mazumdar also wanted India's independence. He also wanted British colonial rule to end. On this, he agreed with Bose. But there was a difference. Mazumdar knew what Nazi ideology meant. He knew the racism, the anti-Semitism, the brutality. And as a doctor, as a physician, he couldn't think of becoming a partner to this ideology. Moreover, he had sworn an oath of loyalty to King George VI. This oath wasn't just a formality for him, it was a matter of honor. The meeting in Berlin was a historic moment. Mazumdar greeted Bose in a private room. He began speaking in Bengali, their shared native language. Two Bengalis speaking in their mother tongue in the heart of Nazi Germany. Bose told Mazumdar about the Indian Legion, a unit of Indian soldiers who would fight in the German army. The goal? To drive the British out of India, to establish a free India. Then he asked directly, "Will you join us? Will you fight in the Free India Legion?" Mazumdar's answer was short and decisive. "No. I cannot and will not join." Bose must have been surprised. Why, he asked. Mazumdar said, "I was taught something. Once you give your word, you must keep it." There was a moment of silence in the room. Then Bose stood up and walked to the door. His final words were, "I don't think we should meet again." And Mazumdar was sent back to Colditz the next morning, but this time not in a Mercedes, in a third-class train compartment. The Germans had sent a message. You said no to us, no more special treatment. But the real difficulty began when he returned to Colditz. Morning, Colditz's communal bathrooms. Mazumdar is brushing his teeth. Behind him, several British officers are talking. They don't even lower their voices. They want Mazumdar to hear it. That damned Mazumdar is a spy. Off he goes to Berlin. Mazumdar turned around. His face was tight with cold anger. He looked at the man who had spoken. He was a tall Guards Regiment officer, 6 feet 2, much taller than Mazumdar. Mazumdar spoke in a calm but determined voice. "I'm giving you 5 minutes to withdraw that accusation." The Guards officer laughed. He didn't withdraw it. When the 5 minutes were up, Mazumdar, standing at 5 feet 6, landed a right hook on the 6'2" Guards officer. The man fell to the ground. Mazumdar jumped on top of him. The fight was short, but the message was clear. Mazumdar would not tolerate insults to his honor, not from the Germans and not from his own friends. This was a matter of great honor. This incident was talked about at Colditz. Some began to respect Mazumdar, but the majority still looked at him with suspicion. He went to Berlin and came back. Who knows what they agreed on, they whispered. The truth was this: Mazumdar had to fight against both the Germans and his own side, a war on 2 fronts, and the heaviest weapons in this war were suspicion and prejudice. So make sure to subscribe and like the video. Months passed. Mazumdar continued to live in isolation at Colditz. Other prisoners were making escape plans, digging tunnels, preparing forged documents, but Mazumdar was not included in any of these plans. "You can't escape because of your skin color," they had told him once. "You'll get caught, and when you're caught, you'll give us all away." Was this argument logical? Partly. Yes, a brown-skinned man would attract attention in Nazi Germany. But the same argument was also being used as an excuse to completely exclude Mazumdar. Mazumdar knew this, and he made a decision. If he couldn't escape from Colditz, then he would find another way to get out of Colditz. The plan was this: to transfer to a camp in France consisting entirely of Indian prisoners. Security at those camps was much more relaxed, and there, together with other Indian prisoners, the chance of escape could be much higher. But why would the Germans transfer him? Colditz was the escape-proof camp. Problem prisoners were sent here, they weren't taken out. Mazumdar knew he had only one weapon: his own body. February 1943, Mazumdar began a hunger strike. The first days were relatively easy. There was a feeling of hunger, but it was bearable. But after the 3rd day, things began to change. Dizziness, weakness, stomach cramps. Everything was getting harder and harder for him. A week later, Mazumdar couldn't get out of bed, but he wasn't eating. The German guards began to worry. A prisoner dying of starvation in their camp would be an international scandal. It would appear in Red Cross reports, a propaganda disaster. But they couldn't force-feed Mazumdar. The man was a doctor. He knew how to protect himself, and he was determined. 10 days, 12 days, 14 days. Mazumdar was now skin and bones. His consciousness clouded from time to time, but every time a German officer came to him and said, "Eat, we'll transfer you," he gave the same answer: first the transfer, then food. 16 days. The Germans gave up. On February 24, 1943, Dr. Birendranath Mazumdar was removed from Colditz. He was to be transferred to an Indian prisoner camp in France. He had finally managed to get transferred. And here's where something interesting happened. Mazumdar's hunger strike and determination earned the respect of the British prisoners at Colditz. The same men who had looked at him with suspicion for months, who had excluded him, who had degraded him by calling him Jumbo, were now looking at him with different eyes. Because Mazumdar, without being included in any escape plan, without passing through any tunnel, had found his own way out, and in doing so, he had risked death. This was courage in its purest form. But the story doesn't end here, because Mazumdar's real adventure would begin after he left Colditz. The transfer train was taking Mazumdar and the other Indian prisoners to France, a cold day in February. The train was passing through Nazi-controlled France, and Mazumdar made a decision. While the train was moving, he forced open the carriage window. He opened it, and he threw himself out, jumping from a moving train. Think about it. The speed, the impact, the risk of injury, the risk of death. But Mazumdar jumped. Miraculously, he got to his feet without serious injury, and he began to walk south, toward the Pyrenees, to reach Spain, and from there, freedom. He walked more than 150 miles. He moved at night and hid during the day. He was hungry, he was thirsty, he was exhausted, but he kept walking. He had no other choice, until he was captured near Toulouse. The Germans took him prisoner again. This time, they would be more careful. They sent him to a camp in Chartres, a camp consisting entirely of Indian prisoners. But the Germans hadn't accounted for one thing. Mazumdar was now a man with escape experience, and at Chartres he would find a friend with the same determination, Durayo Singh, another Indian prisoner, another escape dreamer. The two of them planned together, and on June 3, 1943, they put their plan into action. Singh broke through a wall 2 feet thick. He forced open a window covered with tin sheets. Together, they slipped out into the darkness of night, and they escaped. Ahead of them lay 500 yards of open ground. They crawled for 3 hours. The ground was cold. At any moment, a searchlight could illuminate them. A guard could spot them. But they weren't seen. They passed through 3 barbed wire fences, cutting through each one, crawling, their skin tearing. Then they climbed an 18-foot-high gate. Their fingers were bleeding, their muscles were burning, but they climbed. They did everything to escape. And they were free. But they weren't safe yet. They were still in Nazi-controlled France. They were still hundreds of miles away from safe territory. They walked at night. They hid during the day. They crossed 3 rivers. They received help from French civilians. The resistance network gave them food, shelter, and directions. 560 miles in enemy territory. 2 Indian men, with the risk of their brown skin attracting attention at any moment. If caught, the best case was a prison camp again. The worst case was being shot. But they walked, and finally they reached the Swiss border. Neutral territory, safety, freedom. Mazumdar and Singh had done it. The escape-proof prisoner of Colditz had won his freedom. But the story doesn't end here either, because when Mazumdar returned to England, a new test awaited him. MI5, British intelligence, wanted to meet with him. The reason? The Subhas Chandra Bose meeting in Berlin. Mazumdar was a man who had met with Bose in Nazi Germany, and British intelligence wanted to question whether he was truly loyal. Think about it. The man had escaped from a Nazi camp. He had walked 560 miles. He had risked his life. But his loyalty was still being questioned. The racism and suspicion Mazumdar experienced from British officers at Colditz continued when he returned to England until the war ended and even after the war. A painful situation. This was one of history's most bitter ironies. Mazumdar had been forced to fight against the suspicion of both the Germans and his own side, and this fight lasted much longer than Colditz's stone walls. But Mazumdar never showed resentment, at least not publicly. Years later, in 1950, he married an Englishwoman named Joan Williams. He continued working as a doctor in England. He served as a general practitioner first in Wales, then in Essex. Eventually, he settled in Gelmton, Devon. Subscribe now. In 1996, an archivist from the Imperial War Museum visited him. They wanted to record Mazumdar's war memories. Mazumdar agreed. He talked for hours. He told everything: Colditz, the racism, Berlin, the escape. He had only one condition: these recordings would be released after his death. In December 1997, Dr. Birendranath Mazumdar passed away, and the recordings were opened. His story was announced to the world through Ben McIntyre's book, Prisoners of the Castle. Mazumdar's wife, Joan, in 2022, at age 96, told the Times newspaper, "Biren never saw himself as British, but here in England he never felt ostracized, not like he felt at Colditz." This sentence summarizes everything. Mazumdar spoke like an Englishman, behaved like an Englishman, adopted English values, but at Colditz, his own comrades in arms saw him as a stranger, as a threat, as an other. Unfortunately, that's how it was back then. And despite this treatment, he kept his word. He remained loyal to his oath. He rejected the Germans' offers. He found his own way, and he won his freedom. This is true heroism, not a fight against the enemy, but a struggle to protect one's own honor against the prejudice of one's own friends. If this story moved you, in the next part, we'll discuss Mazumdar's legacy and what this story means for today. I'll also give you hints about another little-known heroism story from World War II. Don't forget to like the video and tell me in the comments which part of Mazumdar's story affected you the most: the hunger strike, the rejection in Berlin, or the 560-mile escape. Subscribe to the channel right now. Now, let's move on to the final part together.
We're in the final part. Let's continue. Early 1944, London. The war is still going on. Europe is drowning in blood. But one man, after a long and dangerous journey, has finally reached safe territory. Dr. Birendranath Mazumdar had returned from Switzerland to England. He had walked 560 miles in enemy territory. He had jumped from a moving train. He had passed through barbed wire. He had crossed rivers. With the help of the French resistance, he had reached the Swiss border, and now, finally, he was in England. But what awaited him was not a hero's welcome. What awaited him were the cold interrogation rooms of MI5. British intelligence was concerned about Mazumdar. Why? Because this man had been taken to Berlin in 1942. He had met with Subhash Chandra Bose. In the heart of Nazi Germany, he had come together with an Indian nationalist fighting against the British. It was known that Mazumdar had rejected Bose's offer. It was also known that he had been sent back to Colditz. But for MI5, this wasn't enough. What if he made a secret agreement? What if he's still connected to Bose? What if he's a double agent? Think about this situation. The man had escaped from a Nazi camp. He had risked his life. He had walked 560 miles for his freedom. He had endured more than 3 years of captivity. And now his own country's intelligence was interrogating him. The interrogation lasted for days. Mazumdar answered every question. He explained every detail: the Berlin meeting, Bose's offer, his own rejection, the treatment at Colditz, his escape, everything. Finally, MI5 decided that Mazumdar was clean, but even this decision seemed to have been made reluctantly. Notes were added to his file. It was recommended that he be kept under observation. A British officer, Major Tucker, testified on Mazumdar's behalf. Tucker had known Mazumdar before he was captured. A good man and a good doctor, he said. He stood firm under great pressure from the Germans. But even this testimony didn't completely lift the cloud of suspicion over Mazumdar. This was the untold face of war. We know the stories of soldiers fighting on the front lines. We know the escape stories. We know the heroism stories. But we rarely hear the stories of people who were met with suspicion by their own side, excluded, interrogated. Mazumdar was one of these stories, and unfortunately, he wasn't alone. In World War II, there were thousands of non-white soldiers fighting in the British and American armies.
Indians, Africans, Caribbeans, Asians. These people fought against fascism. They fought against Nazi racism. But often, they also faced racism within their own armies. This was an uncomfortable truth of history. While the Allies were fighting against Nazi racism, they were also practicing racial discrimination within their own ranks. In the American Army, black soldiers were kept in separate units. In the British Army, colonial soldiers were treated differently. Painful truths, unfortunately. And in a place like Colditz, these prejudices became even sharper because Colditz was a place where the British upper class, the aristocracy, white English gentlemanliness was concentrated, and Mazumdar didn't fit into this world. No matter how well he spoke English, no matter how much he behaved like an Englishman. The war ended in 1945. The Nazis were defeated. Europe was liberated. But for Mazumdar, the war wasn't over yet. In 1946, Mazumdar was sent to India. He was continuing his service in the Royal Army Medical Corps. But things were complicated in India, too. The independence movement was at its peak. In 1947, India would declare independence but would also be partitioned with Pakistan. Millions of people would be displaced. Hundreds of thousands would lose their lives. Mazumdar practiced medicine in the midst of this chaos. He healed people. But eventually he completed his assignment in India in 1946 and returned to England. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. Thank you. And here he began a new life. Mazumdar didn't become a war hero. He didn't receive medals. He didn't march in parades. He didn't appear in newspapers. Quietly, modestly, he continued practicing medicine. First, he worked in Wales as a general practitioner in a small town. He cared for his patients. He healed them. Nobody knew he had escaped from Colditz. Nobody knew he had gone on a hunger strike in a Nazi camp. Nobody knew he had walked 560 miles. He was just Dr. Mazumdar, the town doctor, a kind, calm, reliable man. In 1950, he met Joan Williams, an Englishwoman. They fell in love. They married. Joan knew Mazumdar's story. She knew about Colditz. She knew about Berlin. She knew about the escape. But Mazumdar rarely talked about these things. He wanted to leave the past behind. They moved to Essex. Mazumdar worked as a general practitioner there too. For years, for decades, he served his patients. He contributed to the community. He lived a quiet, dignified life. After retirement, they settled in Gelmton, Devon, a peaceful village, a tranquil life. And Mazumdar didn't tell his story to anyone for years, until 1996. That year, an archivist from the Imperial War Museum visited Mazumdar. The museum was running a project to record the memories of World War II veterans, and they wanted to hear Mazumdar's story. Mazumdar was over 80 years old. He was approaching the end of his life, and finally, he decided to tell his story. He talked for hours. He told everything: the hospital at Etaples, the German captivity, the cold walls of Colditz, the racism of British officers, the Jumbo nickname, the journey to Berlin, the meeting with Bose, the hunger strike, jumping from the train, the 560-mile walk, the Swiss border, the MI5 interrogations. He had now told everything. But he had one condition: these recordings would be released after his death. Why? Perhaps he didn't want to embarrass others. Perhaps he wanted to protect the families of his former friends. Perhaps he just wanted to die in peace, without reopening old wounds. In December 1997, Dr. Birendranath Mazumdar passed away. He was 82 or 83 years old, and the recordings were opened. For years, these recordings remained in the archives of the Imperial War Museum. Researchers could access them, but the general public didn't know, until 2022. Ben Macintyre, a British historian and writer, was writing a new book about Colditz, Prisoners of the Castle, an epic story of survival and escape from Colditz, the Nazis' fortress prison. Macintyre was a famous author. He had written bestsellers like Operation Mincemeat, and he wanted to question the myths about Colditz, to reveal the truths. During his research, he accessed Mazumdar's recordings at the Imperial War Museum and MI5's declassified files. He couldn't believe what he read. Macintyre included Mazumdar's story in his book, and this story became one of the most striking parts of the book. When the book was published, it caused a great stir in the media. The Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, all of them mentioned Mazumdar's story. The BBC announced that it was planning to shoot a new Colditz series based on Macintyre's book, and it was said that Mazumdar's story would have an important place in this series. In an interview, Macintyre said, "The popular image of Colditz is a place where brave British officers fought against the Germans in unity, but the reality was very different. Colditz was a miniature of the outside world. There was class division, there was racism, there was politics, and Mazumdar was one of the most tragic victims of this dark side." But at the same time, Macintyre added, Mazumdar was one of the greatest heroes. Despite the terrible racism he suffered not from the Germans, but from his own friends, he remained loyal to his word. He kept his oath, and by finding his own way, he won his freedom. Joan Williams, Mazumdar's wife, was still alive in 2022. She was 96 years old. In an interview with The Times, she said, "Byron never saw himself as British, but here in England he never felt ostracized, not like he felt at Colditz." This sentence summarized Mazumdar's life. At Colditz, he had been ostracized by his own comrades in arms, but in England, in civilian life, he had finally been accepted, as a doctor, as a husband, as a human being. "Byron was my life, in a way," Joan said, "and I'm so grateful that his story is finally being told." Now let's step back and look at what Mazumdar's story means in the bigger picture. World War II was the greatest conflict in history. More than 60 million people lost their lives. Continents were devastated. Civilizations were greatly shaken. This war is usually told as the victory of good over evil. The Allies were good, the Axis was evil. Democracy was good, fascism was evil. And this narrative is largely true. Nazi Germany was one of the horrific regimes in human history. It needed to be defeated, and the Allies won this victory with great sacrifices. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. But this narrative hides some uncomfortable truths. While the Allies were fighting against Nazi racism, they were also practicing racial discrimination within their own ranks. In America, black citizens were treated as second class. In Britain, colonial peoples were seen as subjects, and these prejudices manifested themselves on battlefields, in prison camps, everywhere. Mazumdar's story was a concrete example of this contradiction. The man joined the British Army to fight against Nazi tyranny. He wanted his own country's independence, yes, but he knew that defeating Hitler was a more urgent priority, and for this cause he agreed to serve his colonizers. What did he get in return? Suspicion, exclusion, humiliation, the Jumbo nickname. The question, "You're going to escape with that brown skin of yours?" And yet, he remained loyal to his oath. He rejected Bose's offer. He went on a hunger strike. He escaped. He walked 560 miles. He won his freedom. This was incredible strength of character, an incredible sense of honor, and an incredible example of humanity. Mazumdar didn't seek revenge. After the war, he didn't expose the people who had treated him badly. He didn't go to the public and say, "Look what was done to me." Quietly, modestly, he continued with his life. This, too, was an example of character.
Perhaps this was his greatest heroism. He had suffered, but he didn't spread the pain to others. He had been hurt, but he didn't use his hurt as a weapon. He just lived, he worked, he loved, and he died. And years after his death, his story finally came to light. Why did I tell you this story? Because we shouldn't see history only as great wars and great generals. History is also the story of people like Mazumdar, silent heroes, invisible struggles, untold sufferings. And these stories still carry lessons for today and for the future. We still live in a world where people are judged by their skin color, their origins, their religions. We still live in a world where those who are different are excluded, looked at with suspicion, treated as the other. Mazumdar's story shows us how destructive these prejudices can be, but at the same time, it shows that a person can protect their honor despite these prejudices, find their own way, and ultimately become free. This is a hopeful message. Now I want to tell you something. On this channel, we tell the little-known stories of World War II. We bring forgotten heroes like Mazumdar to light. We illuminate the dark corners of history. And we can't do this work alone. We need your support. If this video added something to your life, if Mazumdar's story moved you, if you want this kind of content to continue, then I ask you to do these 3 things. First, like this video. This simple action helps the algorithm show this video to more people. Mazumdar's story deserves to be known by more people. Second, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss our new videos. Every day, a new story, a new hero, a new lesson. Third, tell me what you think in the comments. Which part of Mazumdar's story affected you the most? The hunger strike? The rejection in Berlin? The 560-mile escape? Or his quiet life after the war? I read your comments, every one of them, and your feedback shapes future videos. Finally, I want to give you a hint. Mazumdar's story was just one of the little-known stories of Colditz. In that castle, there were other heroes too. Other tragedies too, other incredible escape stories too. In our next video, I'll tell you about another forgotten hero, this time from a completely different front, a completely different struggle. Who is this hero? Which front? Which struggle? To find out, you'll have to wait for the next video, but not for long. But I can tell you this. This story is at least as striking as Mazumdar's, at least as inspiring as his, and at least as unknown as his. So, see you in the next video. This was the story of Dr. Birendranath Mazumdar, the only Indian prisoner of Colditz, the man who was ostracized by his own friends but was never broken, the hero who opened his own path with a hunger strike and won his freedom by walking 560 miles. His story teaches us that courage must sometimes be shown not against the enemy, but against our own side. It teaches us what honor, loyalty, and character mean, and it teaches us that a person can keep their light even in the darkest conditions. Mazumdar died in 1997, but his story lives on. And because you watched this video, this story is now a part of you too. Don't forget him. See you in the next video. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye. Goodbye.